What happens when a former royal, raised on deference and ceremony, sits across from one of America's sharpest late-night provocateurs? What begins as polite chatter can quickly unravel into confrontation. TV no palace tutor could have prepared him for. Tonight, Prince Harry walked onto the Greg Gutfeld show, expecting applause and soft questions. Instead, he met a host unwilling to play along with royal PR. And what followed spiraled into one of the most combustible interviews in recent memory. The studio lights glared across the glossy desk. Greg wore his half-smile as the announcer boomed, "Please welcome Prince Harry." Harry strode out, shoulders squared, jaw tight, confidence bordering on arrogance. A tailored dark suit, tieless, a handshake brief and cool, no smile. He sat, legs crossed slowly, projecting entitlement. "Harry!" Greg began warmly. "Thanks for coming. I know you've been busy. California, media projects, new ventures. Good to have you here." "Of course," Harry replied crisply. "Better your viewers hear from me directly, instead of the nonsense they usually consume." The audience chuckled nervously. Greg's smirk twitched. He wasn't used to being brushed off so quickly. Still, he pressed on. "Let's start light. How's married life? Plenty of headlines about you and Meghan. Has California been a good fit?" Harry's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Married life is more than fine. But I do find it amusing that everyone feels entitled to ask. As if it's anyone's business but ours." The dismissive tone hung in the air. Greg raised his brows but stayed even. "Fair enough. But you've lived publicly. Curiosity comes with the territory, doesn't it?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "Territory I never asked for. But people like you made a living off dissecting things you'll never understand." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Greg chuckled, masking the sting. "All right, let's pivot. You've said moving to America gave you freedom. Do you feel the British public ever truly understood you?" "Understood?" Harry leaned forward, voice sharp. They were fed lies. "Decades of toxic press painting me as some reckless spare. That's not misunderstanding. That's character assassination." "Strong words," Greg replied evenly. "But many in Britain would argue you turned your back on them, on royal duty. How do you respond?" Harry let out a cold laugh. "Criticism from people who bow to a system that traps them. They idolize William and Kate, blind to the rot. At least I had the courage to leave." Gasps filled the room. Greg knew the cameras were catching gold. "Well, since you brought them up, William and Kate. Many admire them for embracing the role you rejected. Do you? Admire them?" Harry cut in sharply. "They've done nothing but play perfect for the cameras, hiding behind palace walls. You Americans worship them because you don't see the truth. I'm done pretending they're saints." The words landed heavy. Greg's smirk faded into a harder stare. "Interesting perspective. But some would say your own life isn't exactly free of cameras. Netflix, books, interviews. That you've monetized your exit. What do you say to them?" Harry leaned back, arms crossed. "I didn't monetize anything. I survived. If people can't handle me telling my story, perhaps they should stop obsessing and find a hobby." A mix of nervous laughter and uneasy silence spread through the crowd. The tension was climbing fast, the studio air heavy, almost electric. Greg gave the faintest nod, his voice calm but his eyes alight. "All right, Harry. I don't shy away from tough questions. Tonight America wants real answers." Harry's stare was steady, almost daring. "Then you'd better be ready for real answers, Greg. Not the fairy tales your viewers are used to." The room stilled. The polite interview had veered off the rails, and everyone knew it. The applause sign blinked, but the clapping was awkward, hesitant. They weren't watching small talk anymore. They were watching a duel. Greg leaned in, elbows resting on the desk, studying Harry like a chess opponent. "You've said leaving Britain was about freedom, about protecting your family. And yet here, Netflix specials, a multi-million-dollar book deal, podcasts, endless interviews. Did you leave duty behind or just swap one spotlight for another?" Harry smirked, shaking his head as if brushing dust from his shoulder. I left because I refused to be suffocated. You call it spotlight. I call it survival. My voice was stolen for years. I've earned the right to tell my story. Greg raised a brow, still calm. But isn't it fair to say you've told it many times? Oprah, Netflix, Anderson Cooper, book tours. Some critics say you've built a brand on victimhood. Harry's jaw tightened. Critics are people with nothing better to do than tear down those actually living. My wife and I aren't victims. We're survivors. And if people are tired of my story, they can stop listening. Simple as that. The audience shifted uneasily, murmurs flickering through the silence. Greg caught it, smiling thinly. Then let's talk about Meghan. Your marriage is constantly in the headlines. Rumors, speculation, whispers of tension. How do you respond to those who say California isn't the fairy tale you promised? Harry leaned forward, irritation dripping from every word. Greg, I'll make this simple. My marriage is none of your business. None of theirs either. He gestured toward the audience. We're happy. Happier than most couples in this country. Frankly, it's insulting I even have to dignify gossip. The words cracked through the room like a slap. Greg kept his tone level. I only ask because you've made your marriage public. Oprah, the book, the interviews. When you invite the world in, isn't it fair for people to ask questions? Harry's smirk returned, this time edged with venom. Fair! The press has never played fair, and neither have people like you. You feed on my life. Without me, what would you even talk about? Admit it. My name keeps shows like this alive. The audience gasped. For the first time, Greg blinked, his smirk faltering. He recovered quickly, leaning back with a dry chuckle. You give yourself a lot of credit, Harry. This show would be just fine without you, Harry scoffed. Would it? Or would you be back to cheap jokes and second-rate commentary? Let's be honest. This is the most relevant your program's been in years. The temperature in the studio seemed to rise. Even the cameraman shifted uneasily as Harry leaned back, smug satisfaction written across his face. Greg inhaled slowly, voice careful now. Let's shift. You've spoken about the royal family, being trapped, unsupported. But some say you abandoned more than the institution. You abandoned your grandmother, your father, your brother. Do you regret the way you left things? Harry's eyes flashed. His reply cut like steel. Regret? The only regret I have is not leaving sooner. My grandmother loved me, but she was bound to the system. My father and brother chose duty over family. That's their prison, not mine. I escaped, and I don't envy them one bit. The audience's murmurs swelled into shocked whispers. Greg sat taller now, the smirk gone, his voice edged with steel. You don't envy them because William and Kate are seen as the model of stability, of dignity. Meanwhile, you've made headlines trashing your family, exposing private conversations, turning centuries of tradition into your personal grievance tour. Harry's head snapped toward him, eyes cold. William and Kate live in a cage. Gilded, yes, but a cage. They smile, they wave, they pretend, and Americans lap it up. You call that dignity? I call it acting. At least I'm honest. Greg's pen tapped sharply against the desk, no longer playful. He leaned forward, voice steady but biting. Honest? Cashing in on secrets? Selling interviews? Pointing fingers. That's not honesty, Harry. That's opportunism. And I think you've mistaken rebellion for relevance. Harry's eyes narrowed, posture rigid. His voice came low and hard. Call it whatever you want. I know who I am. I don't need validation from Britain, America, or late-night talk show hosts. I left a corrupt system behind. If people can't handle that, it's their problem. The silence that followed was suffocating. The studio felt like it was holding its breath. Greg folded his arms, nodding slowly. All right, Harry. Let's see just how honest you really are. The dual lines were drawn. Harry sat like a king without a throne, defiant. Greg leaned in, eyes like a scalpel ready to cut through armor. If the monarchy was so suffocating, Greg asked coolly, why do you keep talking about it? Why build your entire career around the thing you claim to have escaped? Harry let out a hollow chuckle. Because it matters. Exposing hypocrisy matters. Showing the world what really happens behind palace walls matters. If the truth makes people uncomfortable, that's their issue. At least I'm not hiding. Greg tilted his head, a faint smirk creeping back. Not hiding? That's rich. You left Britain demanding privacy, then signed a Netflix deal, released a tell-all memoir, and turned your life into content. That's not privacy, Harry. That's publicity. For a price. The audience gasped, a collective ooh rippling through the studio. Harry's jaw clenched. You think you're clever, don't you? He snapped. Sitting there in your cheap suit smirking, pretending you know what it's like to live under global scrutiny. You have no idea. Greg didn't blink. Cheap suit? I bought this myself. Can you say the same about most of what you've worn? Let's be honest, Harry. Every privilege, every stage, every opportunity. You got it because of your last name. Strip away Windsor, and you're just another guy in LA with too much time on his hands. The studio gasped again. For the first time, Harry's composure faltered. His voice came sharp, defensive. That's absurd. I've built something of my own. I've created a life outside that family. Greg leaned back, calm but merciless. No, Harry, you've monetized that family. Every dollar you've made since leaving has come from your title, your drama, your grievances. Take that away, and what's left? A man in California, living in someone else's mansion, giving interviews about how unfair life has been. Harry's face flushed. His hand tightened on the armrest. The polished calm he'd walked in with was gone. Greg pressed in. So tell us, what have you and Meghan really built? A production company no one watches? Podcasts no one remembers? Interviews about struggles most people would kill to have? You're not outcasts, Harry. You're performers. And without the crown, there is no act. Harry's chest heaved, his mask slipping. The duel had turned into a dismantling, and the audience knew the storm was about to break. Harry leaned forward, jabbing a finger toward Greg. You don't know me. You don't know the pain, the betrayal, the isolation I've lived through. My wife and I... Greg cut in, voice like a blade. Your wife. Let's talk about her. She's an actress. She knew the spotlight. She thrived in it. And together, you've turned your marriage into a brand, a performance. Do you really think people can't see through it? The audience stirred, shifting uncomfortably. Harry's nostrils flared. Leave my wife out of this, he warned, voice cold. Greg didn't blink. Why, she's half the act. You claim to protect your family, but you've built an empire on exposing them. You preach oppression while living in luxury. And William and Kate, you say you don't envy them? Come on, they kept their dignity. You chose self-pity. The words hit hard. Harry's face twisted, his composure cracking. His reply came rough, almost breaking. You don't understand anything. William and Kate are puppets. They perform, they smile, they wave. They're not free. I don't envy them. I pity them. Greg's voice stayed calm, unshaken. No, Harry. You envy them because they don't need Netflix deals or Oprah specials to be relevant. They serve and people respect them. You left and people rolled their eyes. That's the difference! Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few nervous claps. Harry's voice rose, fury spilling out. You arrogant little man. You sit there judging me? You've never lived a day in my shoes. You're a clown, making cheap jokes for cheap applause. Greg leaned in, a smile sharp as glass. And yet here you are on my show. Because without us, without the press, without the family, you've spent years criticizing. You're nothing but a title with no throne. The studio fell into stunned silence. Harry's chest heaved, fists tight at his sides, his face crimson. The prince who once carried himself with untouchable grace now looked cornered, stripped bare. Greg sat back, fingers drumming, his calm restored. Tell me, Harry, he said quietly. Each word weighted. Who are you without them? Without the crown, without the scandal, without the spotlight. Who are you really? Harry said nothing. He couldn't. The silence pressed heavier with each passing second. Greg finally broke it, his voice measured but merciless. You left royalty demanding privacy, peace, a normal life. And yet, here you are again, selling the same story, demanding sympathy. Do you see the contradiction? Harry scoffed, dismissive. That's your spin, Greg. I didn't demand sympathy. I demanded respect. Something you'd never understand. Greg's smirk returned, sharper than ever. Respect is earned, Harry. And let's be honest, you haven't earned much. Strip away the crown, the titles, the drama. What's left? Harry leaned forward, red-faced, pointing directly at him. What's left is a man who walked away from an oppressive system. A man who refused to be a pawn in his brother's shadow. I'm someone who... Greg's voice cut in, rising at last. You're someone who abandoned your duty. Who cashed in on your family's name while tearing it down. Who complains about suffering from the comfort of a mansion most people couldn't even dream of. The audience erupted in gasps. Harry froze, hands trembling, fury etched into every line of his face. Greg pressed on, relentless now. You talk about William and Kate like they're trapped. No, Harry, they're respected because they stayed, because they serve. And deep down you know it. You hate it. You envy it. Because while they stand tall, you're here chasing relevance, trading secrets for checks, pretending to be a rebel when really... Greg leaned in, his voice a dagger. You're just lost. The scrape of Harry's chair against the studio floor echoed like a thunderclap as he shot to his feet. Harry's face burned crimson, his voice trembling with fury. How dare you? You don't know me. You don't know my family. You don't know the hell I've endured. You sit there sneering from your chair while I've lived with threats, with lies, with betrayal. Greg rose too, squaring off, his tone cold and cutting. And yet William and Kate survived the same palace, the same press, the same family, without torching it all. The difference, Harry, is that they grew up. You didn't. You're not a survivor. You're not a leader. You're not even a royal anymore. You're just a man milking a title you no longer deserve. The words landed like gunfire. The audience gasped, some clapping, some whispering in shock. For a flicker, hurt flashed across Harry's face beneath the rage. His lips quivered, his voice cracking as he barked back. You think you can humiliate me on your show? You think you can define who I am? I don't have to sit here and take this. He ripped off his microphone, slamming it onto the chair. This is beneath me. You're beneath me. I won't be part of this circus another second. Harry stormed off, his footsteps pounding across the stage, his back stiff as the curtains swallowed him. The cameras lingered on the empty chair. Silence stretched through the studio like a held breath. Then, all eyes turned to Greg. The host smoothed his jacket, his smirk sliding back into place. Calm, collected, victorious. Well, he said dryly, staring into the camera. There you have it. A man who begged for privacy storming off live television. A man who preaches honesty, refusing real questions. A man who left the monarchy but can't seem to leave it behind. The audience erupted. Applause, cheers, shocked laughter mixing together. Greg leaned forward, his voice resonant, deliberate. Here's the truth. Titles don't create character. Palaces don't build integrity. And running away doesn't make you free. It just makes you lost. Prince Harry walked in expecting sympathy. What he got was accountability. And clearly, he couldn't handle it. The camera zoomed tight on Greg as he delivered the final blow. Ladies and gentlemen, that was one of the most extraordinary interviews we've ever had. We'll be right back. The lights dimmed. Music swelled. The crowd roared again. And within minutes, the meltdown would ignite social media. Headlines screaming across the world. Prince Harry storms, out after explosive clash with Greg Gutfeld. Greg sat calmly at his desk, the storm behind his eyes concealed by a faint smile. He hadn't just interviewed a prince. He'd dismantled one.